Imagine you are a Roman soldier. You have grown up in a world of absolute hierarchies, a world in which the role of women is codified in law, enforced by custom, and backed by the full weight of one of the most sophisticated civilizations on Earth. Women in Rome are under the legal authority of their fathers, then their husbands. They do not fight. They do not command. They do not speak in the Senate or on the battlefield, and the idea that they might is not a controversy. It is simply not a thought that occurs to anyone. This is the lens through which you have understood the world since birth. And then you march north, into Gaul, into Britannia, into the territories of the Celtic peoples, and everything you thought you knew about women is violently disorienting and in some cases lethally contradicted. This is what Roman soldiers really thought of Celtic women, and the answer is far more complicated, far more revealing, and far more interesting than you might expect. Let's start with the physical description, because this is where the Roman sources begin, and because the Romans were nothing if not thorough observers of the people they intended to conquer. Celtic women, as described by Roman writers including Julius Caesar, Strabo, Diodorus Siculus, and Tacitus, were tall, startlingly tall by Roman standards, and the Romans were not short people, but the Celtic peoples of northern Europe tended toward a physical stature that genuinely impressed and unnerved Mediterranean observers. They were pale-skinned, often with hair that ranged from auburn to blonde to a bright, almost artificial red, achieved, Roman writers noted, with a mixture of fascination and disgust by washing the hair in lime water, which lightened and stiffened it into dramatic, spiked shapes. They were loud. This comes up repeatedly in the sources, with a consistency that suggests it was a genuine cultural observation rather than simple stereotyping. Celtic women spoke freely, argued publicly, and expressed themselves with a directness and a volume that Roman men found deeply unsettling. Polybius, writing in the 2nd century before the Common Era, described encountering Celtic women in a context of conflict, and noted that their voices were among the most intimidating aspects of facing a Celtic warband, not because they were screaming in fear, but because they were screaming in fury, and the fury was directed at the enemy with a focus and an intensity that made it clear these were not bystanders, because Celtic women were not bystanders. This is the central fact that reshapes everything else, the fact that the Romans kept returning to, in tones that ranged from clinical observation to barely concealed horror. Celtic women participated in war, not in every tribe and not in every period in the same way, but the pattern is consistent enough across enough independent sources to be treated as historically reliable. Celtic women fought, commanded, and in some cases led armies that the Roman military, the most formidable war machine the ancient world had ever produced, struggled to defeat. The most famous example is Boudica, and if you have heard of her, you probably have an image: the statue on the Thames embankment in London, the chariot, the spear, the flowing red hair. But the reality of Boudica, as described by the Romans themselves, is even more striking than the statue suggests, and it is striking precisely because it comes from her enemies. Tacitus, who wrote the most detailed account of her revolt in around 70 of the Common Era, describes her as a woman of great personal presence, tall, with a harsh voice and a piercing gaze, her long red hair loose over her shoulders, wearing a tunic and a heavy cloak fastened with brooch. He places her on a chariot, moving along the line of her assembled warriors before battle, addressing them tribe by tribe. And here is the thing that should stop you in your tracks. Tacitus was a Roman aristocrat, writing for a Roman audience, and he put a speech in her mouth, a speech arguing for freedom against tyranny, for dignity against oppression. That is one of the most powerful pieces of anti-imperial rhetoric in the entire classical canon. He gave his enemies words the best he could write. That tells you something about how seriously the Romans took her. Boudicca's revolt in around 60 of the Common Era was not a minor disturbance. She led the Iceni and allied tribes in a campaign that destroyed 3 Roman cities, Camulodunum, Londinium, and Verulamium, the modern Colchester, London, and St. Albans, killing an estimated 70,000 to 80,000 people, including Roman civilians, soldiers, and the inhabitants of those cities who were not able to flee in time. She annihilated the 9th Roman Legion in a single engagement, which was an event so catastrophic that it sent shockwaves through the entire imperial administration. The governor of Britain, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, had to abandon his campaign in Wales and march his army back across the country at full speed to face her. When the final battle came, Rome won. But it was a closer thing than any Roman source would comfortably admit, and the fact that it required the personal command of the governor with a carefully chosen defensive position to achieve victory tells you everything you need to know about what Boudicca's army represented. But Boudicca was not an anomaly. She was the most visible expression of a pattern that Roman soldiers encountered across their entire engagement with the Celtic world. Agricola, campaigning in what is now Scotland decade after Boudicca's revolt, faced Celtic forces that included women fighting alongside men. Caesar, in his accounts of the Gallic Wars, describes women appearing at the edges of battles to urge the men on, and, in some cases, to shame those who retreated by standing in their path and refusing to move. Strabo, describing the Celtic peoples of Galatia in modern Turkey, a Celtic culture that had migrated east centuries earlier, noted that the women matched the men in size and strength and were scarcely inferior in courage, which from a Roman writer is a statement of genuine astonishment. The social status of Celtic women was, by Roman standards, extraordinary. Under the legal systems of many Celtic cultures, women could own property independently, could inherit, could initiate divorce, and could pursue legal claims in their own right, freedoms that Roman women of the same era did not possess in anything like the same degree. Celtic women of the warrior class trained in arms as a matter of course. There is archaeological evidence for this that goes beyond the written sources. Female burials across the Celtic world have been found with weapons, swords, spears, shields, interred with the bodies in a manner consistent with warrior status, not symbolic or ritual inclusion, but actual equipment of an actual fighter. The warrior woman was not a myth the Romans invented. She was a social reality they encountered and had to contend with. How did the Roman soldiers feel about this? The written sources give us several registers simultaneously, and they are worth distinguishing from each other. The first register is official contempt, the tone of Roman historians and commentators who present Celtic women's martial participation as evidence of Celtic barbarism, a sign of a society that has not achieved the proper ordering of its members that civilization requires. Cassius Dio, writing about Boudicca, includes a speech supposedly given by a Roman commander before the final battle, in which he explicitly contrasts the proper submission of Roman women with the shameful disorder of an army led by a woman, and this contrast is the whole point of the speech, the ideological justification for the campaign. But underneath the official contempt, the sources reveal something else: genuine fear, genuine respect, and in some cases, something that reads very much like fascination. The physical descriptions of Celtic women by Roman writers are almost uniformly detailed in a way that suggests close and extended observation. These are not the descriptions of people who looked away. Diodorus Siculus, writing in the 1st century before the Common Era, describes Celtic women as not only equal to their husbands in size, but as capable of fighting alongside them and surpassing them in violence when roused, with eyes and expressions so fierce during combat that the spectacle was more terrifying than the men beside them. This is not a dismissive observation. This is a man trying to explain to his readers why losing to these people was genuinely possible. The Roman soldiers who served in Britain and Gaul for years, and many of them did, on postings that lasted a decade or more, had a relationship with the Celtic world that was far more complex than the official literary record suggests. They traded with Celtic communities, married into them, fathered children with Celtic women, and over the generations that Rome controlled Britain and Gaul, created a hybrid culture in which the boundaries between Roman and Celtic identity became genuinely blurred. The archaeological evidence from Roman Britain is particularly striking in this regard. Roman soldiers stationed at Hadrian's Wall, at the northern edge of the empire, set up altars to Celtic goddesses, gave their children Celtic names alongside Latin ones, and participated in religious practices that had nothing to do with the official Roman pantheon. The encounter between Roman soldiers